I think so. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I just need to go do live from. Oh, whatever. So, Zivtech, we're in Philadelphia. We're about 20 some odd people, about 9 years old. And we are a lot of Drupal, but increasingly other stuff as well, including things like Jekyll or Node.js or even just Symfony apps without Drupal attached to them. And Probo, as I said, is the continuous integration sort of tool that I am going to talk about. First, though, a little history. So, and just to give you guys a warning, you're a little bit of a guinea pig for me because this is the first time I'm doing this presentation like this. I've done it. And you'll be able to probably tell which parts are from the old presentation and which parts are new, but trying a new twist on this presentation to see if it makes sense. So any feedback you guys could give me, please do. And if some of it doesn't make sense, please just scream at me or whatever, and I'll try to make it make more sense. So the first, the first thing that, oh, that's weird. The first thing that I want to talk about is just a little bit of the history of how I got here and why we ended up building Zivtech and Probo, which is tied into the history a bit of Drupal. I got involved with Drupal back in 2004 around the Howard Dean campaign, and I'm not sure how many of you know who Howard Dean was, but he was the screamer, the Yar. He'll be forever known as the Yar, and on to Minnesota and Minneapolis and or whatever. I guess Minneapolis is in Minnesota. Sorry. So at any rate, he failed, but what a lot of people don't realize is he sparked a couple of organizations to start that ended up being very crucial to Drupal's early adoption. CivicSpace was formerly DeanSpace, was one of them. It was headed by Zach Rosen, who's at now at Pantheon, who started Chapter 3. It also had like Moshe Weitzman worked there, Neil Drum, Kieran Lau, and a whole bunch of other folks worked there at that time. They were co-located with a group called Music for America, which is actually who I was involved with. And if you look up here at I've got this off the Internet Archive. If you look up there, you can see a much younger Josh Koenig up there in his blogging station in MFA. Music for America was a way for people to volunteer to get out young people to vote in the 2004 election against George W. Bush, if you recall, by engaging people at concerts in a way that would, where you could volunteer essentially, and you can see up here, this is the old MFA volunteer thing. You could select a concert if it had a volunteer slot. You would go there, you would get into the concert for free. The people who were at the concert, or the artists rather, would travel around with the merch, and then we would sign people up to vote, and we would register them on our site, and yada yada. But a lot of the functionalities that were in both of those places ended up becoming a big part of Drupal. So this is actually a slide from Dries' note at DrupalCon Los Angeles. But here you can see some of the modules that were contributed to Drupal by the Dean folks, which include Node. I'm sure some of you have used it. Blogs, user ratings, comments. Like, you know that Drupal didn't have comments before that? It's crazy, right? So even though that it sort of petered out from the campaign, it led to, in the end, a bunch of organizations starting, including Zivtech. This is also from Dries' note, just so that you could see some of the folks that he pointed out. Blue State Digital was not a Drupal shop, and they were like the proprietary wing of that movement, and they started their own shop that ended up selling to WPP, the largest advertising company in the world. But then you can see a bunch of the other folks. The guy there on the top, his name is Andrew Rappaport. He's actually the rich dude who funded it all. But, you know, these sorts of organizations, they were collaborating across, you know, for the first time that I had ever seen, they were collaborating all across the country, all across the world, to help not just build a political movement, but to build the tools that we needed to build a political movement, right? And that's how I started Zivtech. After I saw Josh Koenig and Adam Mordecai and some other folks start Drupal businesses like Chapter 3 and Enablement, I was like, you know, I probably could do that too. It's much more beneficial than working in politics, which was really not a good idea. So, you know, after that, there became a whole big ecosystem. Now, if you look at this is another slide I found on the internet, but a lot of these companies are no longer existing, right? And also Zivtech's not on there, so that's no good. But all of a sudden, right after that, all these companies started to form. Some guy got elected, and really Drupal started to move mainstream big time. This is an Acquia slide. CERN I actually got to do. That was like one of the craziest parts of my career, was going to CERN to train them how to do Drupal, like where the web was born. It was like the Mecca, you know, like go back to Mecca to teach them, you know, Islam or something. I don't know if that's really a good analogy, so don't hold me to that one.
Or a good idea.
Or a good idea, yeah. But so, you know, Drupal, between the White House and all of these big organizations, Drupal really has moved into a much larger ecosystem than it was just a bunch of hackers looking to elect a presidential candidate. And fast forward to now, and we've professionalized, and we're all developing important Johns. I had to throw in Johns. John is a Philly word that means literally anything. Like, oh, that John was fun. Or that I went to the John in the John, and we Johned on the John, you know, so you could really go crazy with that. But in order to collaborate at this level, we needed to, and I think this is true across software development. As we professionalized, we became more like other software developers and started creating tools to be able to deploy and work together in a more sane way, so that we weren't always stepping on each other's toes. And so that's when most of us started to adopt continuous integration and deployment. At Zivtech, we adopted a continuous integration sort of system pretty early on, using initially Jenkins. That did a lot of our testing and stuff for us. But just in case you're not aware of what continuous integration is, or continuous deployment, which are two similar terms. Continuous integration is a development practice where developers are checking in their code regularly into a shared repository. It basically, in its definition, is just like CVS, right? Like it's just, or any version control system. And continuous delivery, which is sort of the next step up, it's more towards agile, so people are developing things in short cycles. They're ensuring the software can be released reliably, and it aims to build and test software faster and more frequently, but it mostly is, both of these cases is doing it in an automated sort of way. So one of the ways I like to think about continuous integration and continuous delivery, and how that differs from what I'll talk about in a second with Probo, is the questions that continuous integration and delivery tries to answer. Like, does this work pass automated unit and integration tests? Did the look of the site or application change in any unforeseen and unintended ways? Do the core functional aspects continue to operate as expected? Has the code been checked by another developer? Does this work in every type of environment it needs to? And can the site be deployed to the live environment without breaking the site or causing any downtime? Some of the tools that we sort of use at Zivtech, this is not an exhaustive list at all, or that we have used at points for this sort of work, and things that I would consider to be in that stack for us are Git, obviously. Bitbucket and GitHub are the two that most of us use. GitLab is also one. Jenkins, Travis, and Circle, which are more traditional CI tools. They're like task running tools. They'll run cron for you. They'll move things when other things happen. They can set off other activities. the Hat, which is a tool that we use, if you don't know, for integration testing, so that it goes around when you write integration tests, it goes around and clicks around on a site. Puppet, Chef, and Ansible, which are the tools to build up your system and to maintain the same versions of all your software across all of your servers. And Sensu and New Relic for monitoring, Docker and virtual machines to actually host the machines. And so this is our old workflow, and on a very small scale, and it kind of sucked. But it did have tests if we were lucky enough to have the client or manager willing to pay for those tests. That wasn't normally the case, but we could have tests. So this is what it sort of looked like after a feature was developed. This is Jody. She's my business partner. She's our CTO. So, as we get into a project, we get from the big sort of picture into an architecture plan, and we go through all the steps. And now we're going to start building it. So the lead developer goes and starts assigning tasks in the form of Jira tickets to some of our developers. A developer would take the ticket. They think about it. What are they going to do? They code it up. They're like, okay, it's ready. The project manager checks in and he says, well, is this done? Is it really done this time? And the developer promises and is, I swear it's done. It's ready to go. It's 100% working. But the project manager hasn't seen it yet, and the project manager is not able to see it at the moment because it's in the Git commit, which they have no access to, really. They're not our project managers. I don't know about your project managers at your jobs. They don't tend to be very technical. They're not running local machines. They don't know how to rebase Git or clone a Git repository, even though they probably do know that level. But so the project manager asked. At this point, the project manager asked the lead developer for a review. The lead developer checks into the branch. Now, that normally means downloading it locally, making sure that they have the most current branch. But she found a problem. So now the devs are hearing grumbling. That's a very common occurrence, grumbling. And the project manager is starting to freak out because now we were supposed to deploy this. This was supposed to take a minute. Now it has to be, now it's a day. The dev, they're pretty sad and they're trying to figure out how to avoid Jody's wrath. So they're going to redo it. So he redoes it. The project manager hopes it's right. This process might go on more than once too. In this case, I just have it going through once. This might happen 3 or 4 times. Finally, the lead developer sees that it worked. She merges the fix, and the client still hasn't reviewed it. So now the client, Mr. Lego Man here, this used to be my picture. I don't know why they took it out. They didn't want me to be the mean client, I guess. But the client decides they want some changes. This was all merged together to show to them, though, to put in a dev branch on a server. But the client only wants 3 of them. The other ones are not ready in their estimation, but they want these things up now. But the problem is it's already been merged. So, hey, can you just deploy just a couple of those changes, Jason? No, because there is no Git cherry pick where you can just go in after the fact and say, Git, give me only ticket 3, 4, and 5 here. No, Git that's already been pushed together. And so now the lead developer is manually having to back out the changes in order to get the regular, the stuff that the client actually wants to the, onto the production site. They have to go and manually, line by line, go through and remove the code that was added. Now the project manager is dealing with the fallout from a pissed client. And this was a constant problem with us. We would go through these periods of feedback and quality assurance that could span days or weeks or more, where it was just all the lead developer putting stuff into a commit, pulling it back out manually, trying to figure out why is something breaking as she's trying to pull together all the different things. And now let's take a look at this process and think about the process from a much larger scale, like a large American corporation, which is this is basically what I feel like most large corporations are like to work at. You know, has anyone ever seen Fire Dog here? Everything is fine as everything is burning down around them. Well, that's sort of how things sort of operate already by default in an organization. So you sort of introduce this process, and it really starts to rub a lot of people the wrong way. For example, when it's demo day or QA period, this is what many offices look like, as everyone, you know, and their mother tries to run for the hills, trying to not be the one that's going to have to answer for this. You know, they're like, oh, well, but we had tests. Yeah, well, robots don't always work, and they're not perfect. And you know, another thing that I think is implied there is that whoever the owner is, the product owner of a product, they may not be, they may not even think something's broken. It just might not work like they want it to. But now, you know, this stuff is starting to drag on, and it's really starting to make you look like you're incompetent. Because, hey, why can't they just push this damn code to the site in a way that isn't going to break my site? The devs are like, why can't this client just make up their fucking mind beforehand and not, or the product owner not make my life miserable? And the question is just, is this really the best that we can do? Because it really, right now, well, right before we had Probo, it was just a constant fight with our clients over this deployment stuff. And it was poisoning some of our relationships, and it was really hurting us. So that's why we came up with this idea of Probo, which is something that I refer to as a continuous collaboration tool. And what is continuous collaboration? Well, unlike CI and CD, which we're referring to developers and automated testing, continuous collaboration is a software approach where organizations seamlessly work together across technical and non-technical departments. And the approach aims to reduce the friction inherent in software development projects by aligning with an organization's decision-making processes and by allowing non-technical stakeholders and team members to contribute and give meaningful feedback on a day-to-day basis. So I mentioned before the questions that continuous integration and continuous deployment try to answer. Continuous collaboration tries to answer a slightly different set of questions. For example, these are just examples of the questions, but does this work meet the business objectives that led to the work being requested? Does it work well with other projects or services that are also in development? Has the change gone through? If you work in pharmaceutical industry, it has to go through something called medical, legal, regulatory, and compliance review, MLRC, and it's a pain in the butt. Does it look like or work like you'd like, which is a very subjective thing? Is this how you want it to look? And would you like to make any changes to how it looks and works? And these are and has this work been approved by the stakeholders who are affected by it? So the tools that we use as part of this, just to give you some examples, are GitHub, obviously again, Jira, which we use for ticketing. We have had to work in other ticketing systems. Jira is terrible. It's like the worst after all the other ones. Confluence for documentation. We also just use Drupal for documentation. Backtrack is our image regression tests, visual regression test service du jour that we like, which I'll show you, and Probo enables us to use that service, whereas we wouldn't be able to use it with any other tools. Zendesk for getting in tickets, or you could use Jira's Service Desk, and our new workflow with Probo. So this is the way it works now. The lead developer assigns a ticket, the devs help, they think about it in code, they open a pull request. The project manager looks, it's broken. But because the pull request has created an environment for them to look at. So they send it right back. They redo it. The project manager sees that now this looks okay. Now they send it to the client. Now you notice who hasn't been involved yet except at the beginning was the lead developer, and now only after the client has approved it does the lead developer merge it and deploy it to a staging site where we looked at all together. And hey, the project running smoothly, the project manager's relieved, there's much rejoicing, and now we get to dance, and now us and our clients and our project managers are all dancing to the same tune. So just to reiterate, without Probo, the in-progress application has a mix of things that are and are not yet vetted by the clients or by a project manager or quality assurance person. Testing a feature branch is really complex because you're merging in all kinds of code from all different places. The devs waste a lot of time by switching tasks between these different things. It's difficult to share the features while they're in progress because you don't want to commit something and have it get in there and then have to pull it all back out manually, like I was saying earlier. And the other issue is potentially you might have useful test content that could get wiped away before feedback comes in. So with Probo, right, like the application only has work that's been approved by the client and is always ready to be deployed. So any day you can, any time of any day, you could deploy it and be fairly certain, you know, within some kind of reasonable margin of certainty that you'll not break anything. Every team member and client can see each feature, and reviewing it is easy and can be done by non-developers. And one of the things that's really changed for Jody, our CTO, for example, is that she does most of her work on a browser now. She almost never works locally because she's not doing as much coding these days. She does more just reviews. So now she can do that on an iPad. Whereas before, you know, it was a constant, I have to check out the branch, make sure it's the right one, blah, blah, blah. The test content that you need for review doesn't get wiped away, and the deployment steps have always been verified. So just to give you a little background on Probo from a technical side, it's built mainly in Node.js and Docker. Right now, the two main integrations are Bitbucket and GitHub. We will have GitLab soon, but most of it is open source. So, hey, if you like GitLab and we don't get to it in time, you could come and contribute to it. We also have a software as a service version that has a couple of added features. The web UI, which I'll show you, is the main one, and the coordinator is just is a tool that we use to control multiple Probo instances. So those two tools are the proprietary parts, but the whole thing works on its own. I'm not saying it's easy to set up, but easy to set up if you're doing open source. It's very easy to set up if you're doing the software as a service. So thank you, and I'm going to do a small demo now. Before I do that, any questions? All right. So how do I? Oh man, this is going to be. Let me just mirror here. Right. Okay, so just to start out, this is where we're normally starting to work, and we work in Jira with our clients a lot of times, not always. If we can, we always get them to work in there, but here you can see just sort of, see if I can. This is not. Sorry, let me just zoom in some more. Okay, so zoom out just a little. So in Jira, we work, and each feature very specific. So we work in feature branches. That's one of the core things that you have to do to take advantage of this. It's also just the best practice. Every feature has its own ticket in Jira and an associated GitHub issue that's going to have our branch name. In our case, that's going to be named this. That way, when things happen, you can see that there's a pull request that's open, and you can also see over here that as Probo is building up, it's posting links back for the Probo build itself, as well as to Backtrack, which is the visual regression tests. Here's an actual issue in, what do you call it, a pull request in, sorry, where's the actual pull request in GitHub. So what happens here, so once that pull request is made, and we can just go and take a look at what this was, you can see it was just some changes to the theme, to an admin theme, right? So we're making the admin theme into our admin theme. Now, once that pull request has been made, it's going to start going through these steps to get Probo to work. And actually, I should show you. So the way that Probo decides what to do is by a Probo YAML file. So here you can see we're telling it here to use Ubuntu 14.04 with, so there's different images that you can use. In this case, we're telling it to use, basically the big difference is PHP versions. So in this case, we want to use PHP 7.1. Assets here are, the first one is a copy of the database. You upload these in the Probo interface. Credentials, we're building out a secret system. For now though, if you want to do things like down here that I'm doing where I am posting back those links to GitHub, you have to have the secret somewhere, so we upload it in a file as an asset, but it's not sort of the best practice, so we're definitely trying to put that to the front of the queue to get a secret service, in secrets meaning like, oh, my GitHub password or something, or whatever those sorts of things are that you need to keep in order to interact with other systems. But basically it goes through, we have a Drupal plugin. There's also WordPress plugins, LAMP plugins, and other plugins so that it'll do some of the Drupal-y stuff for you without you having to do much of anything. But then you can basically run anything as if, they're bash scripts, or you can run drush. And so once the pull request is created, Probo sees this, and it spins up a environment, which we can see here. Actually, I think oh yeah. So here you can see it went through a bunch of site setup, it imported the config, it ran Drupal updates, it rebuilt the caches, it generates a login link, etc. And it installed dependencies to do testing. And then if we go over to, and so, actually I think this one has an htaccess on it. I don't know what it is. Let me go to a different one. This is for our Drupal starter thing that's sort of like Acquia Lightning. It's called Bear. And in this case, you can see we are doing stuff like we're running the hat test that we have for this. So it goes through and runs the integration tests, which is still like a typical CI/CD thing. But then here you can see the big difference is that it leaves this site here. Now this doesn't look like much because it's just an install profile. Let me pull up one that's maybe a little bit less plain looking. Here we go. Let's see if there's anything up. And now this one was cold because it says for an unknown reason. I know the reason is that this ticket was closed. I'm just going to go ahead and rebuild it though, just so that we can see that happen. And then, what else did I want to show? I mean, and that's basic. That's really it. Some of the other features here, besides the ability to post back to other things, you can pin the build. You can. Oh, I wanted to show Backtrack, right? So the pinning of the build is so that so basically the way it normally works is every time you close a pull request, it destroys the build. But if, like, for example, your client is putting in content into the build, that might be bad if it all of a sudden got destroyed. So we do allow folks to pin the build so that they can keep that one build even though other stuff is happening. Let me just log into this. Oops. This is actually built by a Drupal developer who works for, who do they work for? Not Level 10, ImageX. So here you can see what it does. You can see what's changing now. In this case, it looks like mostly everything is changing. Oh. This one doesn't have a thing. Oh, there we go. And here you can see, like, let's see if something changed in here. So here it's saying that this thing changed. So if we go here and we scroll back, yeah, you can see there's some little weird error that got introduced, and who knows where that came from. And you can also, that probably also is what caused all this rest of this stuff to break. But you can see that that's a very useful tool for non-developers to use to find things that are wrong that might not have, because the developer might not even be working on something that's visual per se. Maybe the developer's working on the calendar functionality, and now the one button stopped working. So this helps us to check for that kind of stuff. And see what other things I want to tell you. Oh, so on the Probo website, you can see some of the recipes that we have up there. But I think the key thing that I would say that Probo has done for us is seriously change the way that we work with our clients. So before, because of this relationship, which was constantly in conflict, it was always about, tell me, you have to estimate exactly how much time is this going to take from here until next year. It's like, I don't really know how to do that. To one where we just work together every day to figure out our priorities, and they trust that we're doing what we're trying to do, and they trust the process. They don't think we're incompetent when things break. And because it's not a lot of problem to fix it. It's just like, oh, I see something's wrong, I make a new pull request. So it's moved us into a much more consultative relationship, and it's moved us back towards what really is my passion, which is the collaborative nature of open source and of the sort of work that we set out to do when we started doing open source. So instead of really just helping the clients now with their code, we're also starting to help them try to break down the barriers between the different departments in their own organizations. Because oftentimes what you don't see, or what I don't see as the vendor, is that the person who you're dealing with, who's getting all crabby and screaming at you and whatever when things aren't going well, is getting all kinds of irrational and unreasonable pressure from other stakeholders in their organization. And so with giving them these tools, we can help them to start to, and that's what we're working on right now with a couple of our clients. We help them to really not just collaborate on software projects, but actually just work better together using software, but also just using things like listening and weird, crazy stuff like that, and communication. But really getting them into a set of tools like including Probo, GitHub, Zendesk, those sorts of things, where they can, and Jira, where they can now have a day-to-day working relationship with each other in a way that wasn't possible before this, where they would, just throw lob grenades over the wall, so to speak, or features requests or whatever. So that's my talk. I don't know, I did it way too quickly, I guess. I cut out a whole bunch of it from our previous ones because it didn't fit with my theme. So any questions? Yeah?
So the developer would make a pull request. Would they be using this tool, or would it be the project manager and the client?
Oh yeah, they're going to use it too, for a variety of reasons. I mean, the developers still, I mean, especially if they're running tests, right? Like they're still going to get the test reports back. And it depends on which developer you're talking about, right? But they're going to use it only, the developers are only really going to need to use it after somebody else has already really pulled it all, you know, verified it. So they don't even necessarily have to use it, is I guess, the thing. I think in most cases they do still use it, though, just to see, I mean, especially when something goes wrong, because then you can really go and look into it and see what happened. But it is mostly for, I mean, it's beneficial, I think, to everybody on the team. But I think it's personally, I think it's most beneficial to those people like the project managers who are normally shut out of the process in a meaningful way. Yep.
Yes, you said it's open source. Do you have other companies interested in developing the Probo with you?
We've gotten a bunch of pull requests. So that's mainly from people who are using the software as a service application and want something that we don't have time to get to, and they just make it. But we are looking for bigger open source installations. We have a conversation going on right now with a major government agency. We'll see, but they would be using the open source and investing in that as well. So for right now, it's mainly just us, but hey, pull requests are welcome.
Yeah. Is it flexible in the tools you are using? Like I have clients using Redmine instead of Jira.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. It'll work with anything. So in the case of Jira, right? I don't know if you saw. Basically, we just did a really hacky way of. If I go onto the documentation site, there's a recipe section. And the way that we integrated with Jira and Backbone is pretty hacky. And you can see here, we're just running a bunch of commands that are hitting up its API. So if you can do it from within, if you can script something to hit an API, yeah, you can use anything. You can use it with anything. And as far as what'll run within Probo, anything that'll run on Linux. It's Docker based, so the only limitation is it has to be Linux. But for example, we use it but outside of Drupal, I don't know how many of you folks use things other than Drupal, but one example of how we use it outside of Drupal is actually for this documentation site. So this documentation site, which is also open source, here we go. This is running, do you guys know what Jekyll is? It's a static file generator using Ruby and mostly hosted on GitHub. I think they made it, GitHub. But here you can see like what we're using it for like right now. And look at that, I got a recipe for Jekyll waiting for approval right now. So I have this pull request. This is actually, but what we're able to do with this, and I know this sounds weird for people that haven't been outside of Drupal for a while, but there's no like approval workflows in Jekyll. You know, like there's no way to like look at it before you say, okay, that's what I want. So what we can do with this is I can actually go and take a look at the documentation site with the recipe, and I can see it in place and decide if that's, let's see, where is the, I don't even see it. Oh, there we go, using Probo and Jekyll. So like I can go now and for this use case, we actually use it for content moderation. It also allows us to get content from open source contributors. Well, most of these recipes were not made by us. It allows us to, people can just submit a pull request against our documentation site, and we can look at it and say, oh, that's what I want. A couple other things from the Drupal side that I'm thinking of. It does support both multi-site and domain access. It has a flagging system that you can use with the URLs so that you can handle multiple sort of domain URLs from within one Probo instance. We have a client who has like 50 country sites, and they're each a domain access site, and so yeah, we have it working with that. The way to do it with multi-site is still pretty hacky enough that we don't even really have it up, but basically you can have multiple Probo YAML files, and it can build up one for each of the steps that are in there. Yeah, so in this case you can see it's running things like Ruby gems, and see if you go back in here, we look at the code. And we also are still using Travis to build it up outside of our own systems. But here, this is just all the sort of junk you have to do to get Jekyll to run. So that's with that. Any more questions? Comments? Angry, criticisms? Yeah. Any angry fists out there? What do you guys use right now to get to test your stuff out and to get client approvals? Nothing?
Looking for something like this.
Right. I'm always just curious to hear like the workarounds that people come up with. What's that?
For CI.
For CI?
For CI.
Yeah, for CI or just for approvals. CodeShip. Cool. Anyone else? Is nobody else here doing any sort of testing or anything? Well, I think the good thing about a system like Probo is it's not just like for testing, automated testing. Like if you don't have tests, it's still very helpful because you can test the old-fashioned way, like look at it and make sure it's not broke. Any other questions? Should I do a song and dance? What should I do for the next? I feel like I'm not giving you your money's worth here.
Well,
Everybody gets a refund. What's that?
Just sit down and say nothing, and
That's it.
I wanted to ask a bit about how the client would interact, because there's one slide you showed, it looked like a website, and it had some graphics on the right of people, images, and on the left it had like these red splotchy things. I assume that meant something bad is happening. So that's how the client is able to see.
Well, yeah, and just to be clear, that's Backtrack. So Backtrack is a software as a service, which is really easy to set up with Probo that allows you to do that kind of check. So it's doing that. The only reason we're able to use Backtrack, we weren't able to use it with like Travis, is because Travis doesn't leave a site there for you to compare against for another service. But you could give it to the client or not, right? Like you have to decide with your client if it's going to be something the client's going to be okay with looking at and giving feedback on or not.
So with Probo, then how is the client interacting with it and then communicating with it? Problems, or this is not going the way they want it to?
They would do it from within Jira. So I had one up here. Let's see. Let's see. GitHub Zivtech. So it depends on the client. So the clients mostly are going to be interacting with us either through Jira, through Zendesk potentially, through Jira Service Desk, or possibly writing GitHub itself. It really depends on how sophisticated the client is. But for the clients, they're generally not going to get a link back to this Probo app. And I should have shown folks more around this app. But generally, they're not going to come into this part to see all this stuff. This is really just for developers. Let's see, one here. We're just normally going to send them the links, which are this view site link here. The other thing is that we have is this permanent permalink, and that's because if you change the pull request, it will change the URL, but that other one will still be available if you have it set up that way, so that you can go back and look at, you could look at like basically the latest version of that pull request or any of the specific pull requests that were made within the feature branch. So in this case, there's not multiple of them. Like there would be a little checkbox that would say, "Oh, look at old versions here." The other thing to mention is that the way that we get the assets, we have this asset system here. So you can just either drag your database, or in this case, we also have Terminus loading or it's just your Terminus secret loading for Pantheon, so that we can grab the database automatically when we're doing stuff. And then we use an upload token to actually push you can also use an upload token to push it from within your application, or from within, from the command line. So the client is generally going to be like working in here. Let's find one where they are working in here. Let's say, oops, here we go. Yes, I think they're working in here with us. So here's one that needs client review, and you can see here they're getting. They're coming in here, they're saying, nice catch before merge, so in this case, they're fixing a regression in the video link that they found. And this client in particular is extremely, extremely picky about things like a color of a link changed. That is like the end of the world for this client. I'm not exactly sure why. And here you can see they're CCing, this is the communications department, the group that they were having a little bit of trouble working with in the past, and they were, but they're all sort of working together with us inside of here now, and they can review the changes right from here, so that they don't have to go and log into GitHub or try to understand how those issues are going to work. But you could post it. You could post it wherever you want, right? You could post it in in an Excel sheet. We've done that a lot as well. Like if we have a QA spreadsheet going on, you could post the links in the spreadsheet, and it works the same way. And here you can see that other, remember I mentioned the permalink versus, here you can see the specific pull request, that it's not, the comprehensive R network. It says the -- PR112. That -- is also how you would do like Spanish or something, or French, like if you had a French site or something. In this case, we don't have a French site. Anything else? And yeah, I mean, this is like an exact copy of the site. So you could go in and do anything that you could do on a regular site. You could come in here on the regular site and do it here as well. For some clients, we also provide like login links as well, so that they can just log in. It's just so that they don't need to even use their account. Just log in as an admin. Yep. Am I out of time? Oh, good. I thought I was way short. All right. Well, thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of your conference.